Hello there, Ray here, and today I will be explaining how you can get an indestructible ender crystal and some cool things that you can do with them. In my dragon egg generator video, I showed that I had an ender crystal that could not be destroyed in survival, but I never explained how I got this in survival. The way that you can obtain these special ender crystals in survival is by taking them away from the obsidian pillars in the end during a specific time. When you resummon the dragon by placing down the ender crystals around the exit end portal, the dragon resummoning sequence will begin by regenerating each of the obsidian pillars and the ender crystals on top of them. During this process, the ender crystals are actually invulnerable to any damage at all. This is to prevent players from just destroying the ender crystals as the dragon is trying to be resummoned in. Once the dragon is resummoned into the game, then the ender crystals become vulnerable again, so that they will blow up like they normally do. So here, once the dragon is summoned in, if we try to destroy it now, you can see that it easily gets destroyed. Because of this period where the ender crystal cannot be destroyed, is the reason why my simple glitchless automatic dragon killer has to wait a while before it dispenses the TNT to blow up the ender crystals. The easiest way to get the invulnerable ender crystals in survival is just coming in and having the resummoning sequence of the dragon begin. Now at any point during the resummoning sequence of the ender dragon, you can just relog. This will cause the entire sequence to just freeze in place. So now if we just log out and rejoin the game, we will be able to see that the sequence has just frozen in place. Now if we go to any of the ender crystals that have been regenerated, these will stay as invulnerable ender crystals and they cannot be destroyed in survival. These are any of them that have the beams pointing towards the center, but this method only works in single player. To obtain the special ender crystals in multiplayer as well as single player, we just start up the dragon resummoning sequence, and now all we have to do is that once the dragon has resummoned in the ender crystal and regenerated the obsidian pillar, we just come in and we just push the ender crystal off of the obsidian pillar. This is to allow the ender crystal to be far enough away so that once the dragon has been resummoned, it will check and will change all the ender crystals back to their normal state. So any ender crystals that are too far away will not be able to be changed back, and therefore they will stay invulnerable. So now if we go into survival and we try to destroy this ender crystal, it is invulnerable and it cannot be destroyed, while all the other ender crystals around here have become vulnerable again. Now if you only want one of these special ender crystals, you could probably just start the ender dragon resummoning sequence, then ender pearl to the first obsidian pillar, and then just get your pistons out and your buttons and then push the ender crystals off the edge. But if you want to get more than one ender crystal off the edge at one time, then it's best to have a flying machine that will fly through and push the ender crystals off so that you don't have to be there to push them all off. Or they can push ender crystals far enough away so that the ender crystal will not interfere in your dragon fight if you do want to have the dragon fight afterwards. The way that I have the flying machine move the ender crystal away from the obsidian pillar during the dragon resummoning sequence is by using the area in which the obsidian pillar deletes blocks to start off the flying machine. When the obsidian pillar regenerates, it will also delete all blocks within a 21 by 21 by 21 meter area centered on this bedrock here. This will also cause it to delete this obsidian pillar here in front of the flying machine. But since the obsidian pillar regenerating will not cause any updates, since I also showed this in a previous video and how it can be used to make floating blocks that normally don't float. This is why I have this flying machine being updated by this piston here. Now that we're ready, we can start up the ender dragon resummoning sequence, and now it will come along and it will regenerate each of the pillars. When it comes to this pillar, it will remove the obsidian block, and then the flying machine will get updated by this piston, and then the flying machine will come across and move this ender crystal off of the bedrock. Normally this would cause the ender crystal to explode since you're moving an ender crystal with a flame block underneath of it. Now that is actually a bug, but once the flying machine has moved the ender crystal far enough, I have a obsidian block here that will stop the flying machine. Now if you want to, you could destroy the ender crystals at the exit end portal, and this would prevent the ender dragon from getting summoned in. Or else you could just move the ender crystals out far enough so that the ender crystals do not affect the dragon fight. Once you have your invulnerable ender crystal, you can move it over here and move it over into the overworld by pushing it through the exit end portal. All you have to do is line it up against the bedrock here and then just push it in, and it'll end up at your spawn point. You can also send it through the gateway portals, but you cannot send it through the nether. Now if you come out to the other side, the ender crystal will be here at your spawn point. Now that you have the ender crystal over here in the overworld, you can see that it looks quite different than the ender crystals that you place by hand. Now these ender crystals here don't have this base. This base here is just to represent bedrock, but it's just part of the ender crystal. And these ender crystals only have the base if they come from the obsidian pillars in the end. And they also have a beam. And this beam is from the end as well. This beam here is supposed to point to 0, 0 at Y level 128. It's supposed to point to where the dragon is going to be summoned in. But when you move it over here to the overworld, it still points to that same location. So if you have this ender crystal far away from 0, 0 in the overworld, the beam will be very low and close to the ground. So you can actually make that very nice sculpture out of this just by having the ender crystal placed on top of some really nice blocks. Maybe you can show this off at your spawn point or something. Another use for this invulnerable ender crystal is to protect your blocks. Now since this block is submerged inside of this entity, it cannot be broke because when you try to click on the block, you're actually clicking on the ender crystal here. So it don't matter which way you come around this, the block is fully submerged within the ender crystal, so you cannot destroy it. Now if you look at the hitbox, you can see that the block was pushed into the ender crystal. Now you could still get to this block by just pulling the ender crystal out with the piston or pulling the block out with the piston. But it is kind of a neat feature that you can actually destroy any blocks if you have the ender crystal in your way. So I made this pretty neat trap out of it. So if the player walks over top of this piston, he get pulled into this box. And you would think you could escape from this, but you cannot actually break any of these blocks while in survival, since you're inside of the hitbox of this ender crystal, and all the blocks hitboxes are just outside of the hitbox of this ender crystal, so you cannot break them. So you're pretty much stuck inside of this box. The way that this works is that the piston here will have a pressure plate on top of it, and then when you step on the pressure plate, you will cause power to go over here, and this will just cause the piston to extend. And then when it extends, it will break the pressure plate off, which will depower it, causing the piston to retract. And any entities on top of the piston will get warped through onto the other side. These invulnerable ender crystals cannot be destroyed by player means, so you can hit on them all you want. You can use any type of projectile on them. It won't break them at all. And you can use your own arrow on them. And there is currently only one survival friendly way to get rid of these ender crystals once you summon them into your game. There's a lot of similarities between this invulnerable ender crystal entity and this falling sand entity, which is constantly falling down on top of this fence here. So just as this entity over here can ricochet arrows back, and if I draw my bow back, I can actually ricochet an arrow and hit myself with it. Same goes for this entity over here. So you see that I hit myself with the arrow. Now the difference is that you can see that the arrow actually renders here. I can see the arrow. But any arrow that hits this ender crystal just vanishes, even though the arrow is actually really here. So it's kind of interesting, but if you shoot a bunch of arrows at it, it doesn't actually increase the entity count. So if you look at the F3 and the entity count, the arrows are actually currently right here on the ground. They don't render or show up. I can actually pick up these arrows, and they won't actually affect the entity count at all, which is kind of interesting. Now just as this entity here, if an arrow comes down and hits it from the top, it'll pop up as an item. This is a trick that Galilei has shown. So these arrows that hit it turn into items that can actually be picked up by hoppers. Now the same actually happens with these invulnerable ender crystals here. If you shoot them just right, you can actually make the arrows pop off. But if you shoot them from the top, you can actually make them pop off 100% of the time. So here I just have some arrows in here, and then when I let them out, they hit the ender crystal and then they pop off as an item. And it works for all three types of arrows. Using this invulnerable ender crystal, you can make a music disc farm pretty easily. All you have is a skeleton that's trying to shoot an iron golem, and the ender crystal is in between. So if the skeleton shoots through and he tries to hit the iron golem, he will always hit this ender crystal, and the ender crystal will not blow up or anything. But he can still have a really good view of the iron golem on the other side. And if a creeper is in between his shots, then the creeper will be killed by a skeleton. This will allow the creeper to drop music disc. You may have seen an ender crystal like this on fire before, and usually you see this in the end when the ender crystal is trying to be moved, and the ender crystal believed that he caught on fire from his own flame block below him. But this is in the overworld, and the ender crystal doesn't have a flame block in the overworld. The way that this ender crystal is catching on fire is actually from the skeleton, who has a flame bow, and the skeleton over here is trying to shoot this iron golem on the other side. and instead he's accidentally hitting the ender crystal, and he's causing the ender crystal to catch on fire. Here I have a skeleton that's trying to shoot this iron golem here, and there's an ender crystal here. And when the skeleton here shoots the top of this ender crystal, his arrows will just get deleted. This is similar to that sand trick, where if skeletons shoot their arrows onto the top of the sand, they would just delete the arrows altogether. This is a nice way to get arrows from skeletons to get deleted. A trick that I showed in my sand generator, the sandstorm, and my dragon egg generator, is that you can stick an ender crystal inside of the obsidian platform, and then when the obsidian platform regenerates, the ender crystal will replace the obsidian piece that is inside of the ender crystal, and it'll replace it with its fire block, since the ender crystal will generate a fire block in the end. And this is an interesting technique you can use to actually, when you send items through the end in 1.8, it will cause the platform to regenerate. This allows items to fall right through. And in 1.9 you can actually have it so that you can remove the entire platform and just replace it with ender crystals, and then if a player comes into the end, he'll be able to fall right through without having any obsidian platform to save him. There is one way that you can actually remove these invulnerable ender crystals from your game. The way this is done is by having this invulnerable ender crystal be a part of the resummoning of the dragon. So this is the invulnerable ender crystal. If I try to destroy it, I can't. Now if I actually come and resummon in the ender dragon, all these ender crystals will actually get destroyed, no matter what they are, if they're invulnerable or vulnerable. There is a world download in the description if you would like to check out this world in greater detail. So there you have it guys, a way to get invulnerable ender crystals in your very own survival world, and some pretty cool things that you can do with them. So if you found this interesting, show me a like. If you'd like to see more interesting vanilla survival content, subscribe, and don't forget to comment. Bye bye!